Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Stay Connected with the Worcester Senior Center. I'm Dr. Michael Hirsch, the Medical Director of the Division of Public Health here in Worcester, as your host. And for those of you who haven't seen this TV segment before, I usually talk a little bit about things about the month that we're in and also about some health challenges that we might be facing and some tips on how you can have a happier and healthier month ahead. So this is all about March, this edition, because of some strange scheduling problems, some technical problems with some flooding here in the studio, etc. We didn't really have time for a February edition. So I'm going to skip right over to March. And you know, March comes in like a lion and goes out like a lamb. Those days may be gone. And that's one of the things I really wanted to talk the most about today is climate change. But before I do, let's talk a little bit about March in general. For thousands of years before the adoption of our current calendar, March was actually the first month of the calendar. So a lot of New Year's kind of celebrations and things were scheduled in March. But it ended up becoming the third month of the calendar. And it's named after the Greek god of war, Mars, which is unfortunate because he's actually the Roman god of Mars. But I think that March is a contentious month. It's the first month, if you're having a war, where you can actually start fighting again. And you may think that that's not a big factor in how these months were named, but there were so many conflicts going on back in those early days in the time of before the birth of Christ and then afterwards in the early days of the church, that the armies had to kind of hole up for the winter, you know, like Washington did at Valley Forge, and nothing thought out enough for them to fight until March. So that's a big reason why Mars became the symbol of this month. And it's not that untrue today. You'll see that starting in March, the offensives by the Russians and hopefully the counter-offensives by the Ukrainians will step up because they're just stuck in trench warfare now. Of course, there is a lot of drone striking and other things going on in that terrible conflict, but March is the thaw-out month. And by the time it ends, we've switched over to spring. March 20th or 21st is the spring equinox, and that's where we start adding significant time to each day for daylight. On the second Sunday of March, we actually will switch the calendar over to daylight savings time. You'll leap forward an hour, one of my least favorite activities. I really feel like that reasoning for switching the clock around has no relevance at this point. We're not a farming nation, and having more daylight is not going to yield a bigger load of crops. But it is going to disturb people's sleep patterns, which are very important. So from a public health standpoint, I am not in favor of switching the clocks around. But that we must because we want to be all on the same page. But there is a lot of movement now to try to eliminate this time change thing. So what else is March known for? Well, a lot of diseases have embraced March as their big month. Diabetes for one, multiple sclerosis, victims of child abuse, and I think all of those diseases are very important. Diabetes is probably one of the biggest sources of what we call morbidity, meaning sickness, and mortality, meaning death, in our country. There are two types of diabetes, as you probably all know. There's type 1 that you're actually born with, where your big problem is that your body is not making enough insulin from a usually genetic defect, and you have to get the insulin replaced from an early age. There's some amazing improvements, though, in how we deliver the insulin, where it can all be done with a little implantable pump so that people can live fairly unrestricted lives with diabetes, so long as they, are aware of their diet and trying to avoid an excessive sugar load, or, the fructose syrup that gets put into a lot of processed food is also a big actor here. But type 2 diabetes is the one that's going off the charts because it comes with obesity. The more fat cells that you accumulate, particularly in your midsection, the more your body becomes resistant to the effects of insulin. The insulin receptors are no longer picking up the insulin, and insulin's job is to try to, keep our sugar levels down. So you end up basically, as an older person, falling into type 2 diabetes. It's commonly diagnosed in the 30s and 40s. I got diagnosed when I was 52, and it's a challenge to try to make sure that you find a regimen that works for you so you can keep your glucose levels down, because your glucose levels being high set you up for many problems with the clotting of your blood vessels. So that can increase the risk. When you get a clot in a blood vessel like a coronary artery, you get a heart attack. You get a clot in a vessel leading to your brain, you get a stroke. You get a clot in a blood vessel leading down to your legs, you can lose circulation in your legs, and it's a kind of an emergency thing. And then, of course, if you get a clot in a vein in your legs, that's called deep vein thrombosis. That's very, very, very painful, and also can throw off pieces of that clot upstream and cause all them kind of problems with stroke and other things. So type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes are very serious. And type 2 diabetes is in most cases preventable, which is why we're working very, very hard to try to keep the obesity levels in our children down. And it's hard because many of the manufacturers of processed foods, fast foods, the things that we love to eat are not helping us that much. You start to see a little bit of the ice cracking here because if you go to a fast food restaurant, there are some healthy alternatives that are on the menu now. You don't have to get in your Happy Meal cookies, and that you can get an apple. These are the things that have taken years of wrangling in Washington to try to see if we can make a dent in how these manufacturers produce our food. So, yes, these are important things, and March is going to be their standard bearer for the month. March has as its official flower the daffodil, which many of you gardeners out there know is one of those first pioneer flowers that sticks its head out from the ground if you've planted the seeds and the bulbs, and it checks out. Is it okay? Is it okay? And it's such a beautiful yellow color, and when you see a little bank of them, it really makes you feel like, spring is coming, and that's always a good, joyful feeling. The birthstone of March is the aquamarine, which is a form of quartz It's also always been considered a stone that celebrates victory in battle. So there you go back to the god of war, Mars. But there are a few dates that I wanted to point out before we talk a little bit more about climate change that I think are important in March. March 2nd is National Reading Day. And I think this is a very important concept. Reading with your children. There are signs all over our Worcester Public Library, are the 20 most important minutes of the day for your child's development. I am, as I think I have mentioned before on this show, a new grandpa. I have two beautiful granddaughters. One is 15 months old and one is 10 months old. And their parents read to them every night. And it's so amazing because these little girls are not really speaking yet. The older one, the 15-month-old, has a few words that kind of sound like a word. If she opens up a book and sees a dog, she says, "Go, go." That's what she calls a dog. But the fact that you could ask her, will you point to where the cow is? And she starts to do that. Will you point to where the bird is? Then she can do that. And it's because she's been reading with her parents like that on their lap since she was like 3 months old, maybe even earlier. In the bathtub, she has a bath book that's, waterproof. It's been shown now by our neurodevelopmental specialists and by the behavioral pediatricians that this kind of input into the brain is so important. It's amazingly important. And I can tell you, as a trauma surgeon, as a pediatric trauma surgeon, unfortunately, I've taken care of many brain-injured children, injured in a way that you would think their brain is not going to come back from the impact they had, whether it's as a unbelted passenger in a car, or whether it's a pedestrian who was struck by a car, hit the pavement very hard and has very bad head injury. If the patients that were the victims of this kind of trauma have done this kind of reading, done this kind of experiential learning, even at that very early age, they have a whole other half of their brain that can take over, provided that they have total brain involvement. And I've seen so many of these kids leave our hospital where we didn't think they were going to have any function of higher executive nature where they could talk and communicate, and they come back and maybe their speech is a little halting, but there's lots of comprehension and lots of high function, and these end up being productive young people. And it's because of the early injection of reading and the things that go with reading, like exposing your children to new things at a very young age, younger than you would even expect. And that doesn't mean screen time. Screen time is controversial. There are many, many pediatricians who feel that too much screen time too early is actually detrimental to the learning of the children. That the learning in those early years, those first 2 years, should be predominantly by books, workbooks, coloring books, all of those books where you actually hands-on are working with your child. The screen should not be the babysitter, and the screen should not be just left unattended while the kids are absorbing it. They're absorbing a lot, and unless you're on a special station that doesn't have commercials and doesn't have previews of other more adult shows later in the day, your kid could be picking up a lot of bad things from the TV. So I think that March 2nd is a very important day, and we should all pay attention to it. Now, on March 10th, that's a personal landmark day for me because that's the day that the pandemic was declared in 2020. So believe it or not, it'll be the 4th year anniversary this March the 10th. And, you know, everything gains as you move past things. You get a little more perspective, perhaps a little more insight. It's not so raw to think back on those very, very scary early days. But that's why I wore my Worcester Together hat today, because that's when Worcester really came together to try to fight this. We never had a situation where we had people in the hospital wearing garbage bags instead of protective equipment. We never had a situation where we didn't have enough ventilators because we were proactive in getting the material that we needed. The whole city came together under the aegis of City Manager Augustus and Tim Garvin of the United Way and several other heroes, too many to mention. I know I'm leaving people out, who charted a course for us so that we fortunately got through this pandemic, yes, with 600 deaths. That's too many. 600 tables around our city that are missing a person at the table. Doesn't feel good. But I do believe, based on how other cities face this challenge, that we could have done so much worse if we hadn't come together. And we did. And the support that the Department of Public Health got, the support that the first responders got, that the police, fire, EMS teams, our emergency management group, we all felt how the citizens of Worcester appreciated what we were doing. And we, in turn, I think, were energized to do the 20-hour days, 7 days a week, no vacations. For over 2 years, that was how things rolled in the city. So March the 10th, I don't know whether our current city administration is going to acknowledge it, but I'm acknowledging it right here. And a big part of what happened that was positive was that the seniors of our town represented to their families that they believed in the information that was coming out from our press conferences that we were having with Mayor Petty and City Manager Augustus and me and the caboose. And that helped a lot of extra vaccinations happen. Because once 2021 rolled around, we got the vaccine. And the vaccine, I think, made a huge difference. As a matter of fact, just this week, a report came out from the CDC saying that long COVID, and that's the person that has COVID symptoms for longer than 6 months after their original bout of COVID, are most prevalent in the states where the vaccine usage was the lowest. So it's mostly in the South, Southwest that we're seeing long COVID. We are seeing some long COVID here in Massachusetts, but Massachusetts is one of the lowest states. But to be on the safe side and to be on the complete side, the Department of Public Health is going to be launching some programs to try to help folk with long COVID, or to help practitioners taking care of patients with long COVID have a better idea of what the lay of the land is. There's an excellent group in Boston Medical Center in Boston that has been charged with disseminating this educational program. I was lucky enough to be chosen to take their course in Boston, and they're coming in middle of March to train another group of trainers here in Boston from public health and public nursing, and then we're going to start our own group of courses that will hopefully spread the information so that people who might not even recognize that they have long COVID can fight it off. But I'm hoping that we will keep COVID on the run. I was disappointed this past September when the booster came out that we really didn't have a big surge of people running to get it. I think it's still at about 18% of the community has gotten that last booster. It's a good idea to get it. And it's going to become part of our yearly routine. One of the sequelae of COVID is that people in general are not that happy with vaccinations. And fortunately, there's a presidential candidate from Massachusetts who's spreading a lot of disinformation about vaccinations. And that's why we're starting to see these outbreaks of measles and smallpox and other diseases that had been almost completely eradicated with the vaccination programs that we had, because people just haven't been signing up to get new ones. So if you still have a family with young kids that are going to be going through their primary care, and the primary care people are going to be offering their vaccinations in a sequential way, like scheduled way, please encourage them. Please provide some positive reinforcement, because really, essentially, it's one of the major advances in medicine since the time of Dr. Edward Jenner, who first vaccinated against smallpox in England in 1796. These are the things that have changed the course of humankind. And to walk that back because people just have this terrible disinformation about where COVID came from, and did it come from a lab, or did it come from a wet market in Wuhan province? Doesn't matter. If we do the right stuff, we can hold it at bay. And yes, the flu is a pain. Every year we get these outbreaks of flu, but with the flu shot, it's really, really improved our response to the flu. It'll be the same thing moving forward. We'll be getting boosters to fight off the COVID variant of the day. And will it keep you from getting COVID? No, but it may keep you from getting in the ICU or in the morgue. So that's March 10th. How about March 11th? This is a kind of a fun one, right? Do you remember the name Johnny Appleseed? Johnny Appleseed, he grew up in Leominster, right here in our backyard. And he spread the word about how important it was to plant fruit trees for nutrition, for health, the vitamins that they contain. He didn't just plant apples, he planted berries of all kinds. And his sphere of influence was amazing. From Maine, essentially, to Indiana. This man traveled all those states to spread the word. And, from that we have some beautiful orchards. But it all started right here in central Massachusetts. So tip your hat to Johnny Appleseed on March 11th. That's an important date. Two other dates I'm just going to mention. March 17th. Hey, I know everybody knows what March 17th is. It's St. Patrick's Day. And in 2022, I had the privilege of being the co-grand marshal, along with now our former city manager, Ed Augustus, as the grand marshal of the St. Patrick's Day Parade. One of the highlights of my life. Absolute joy. I had my family there. I had my little grandnephews there on the reviewing stand, and they had signs encouraging me to do the 2-mile walk, and it was wonderful. But I was embraced by the Hibernian Society, and I guess I'm a an honorary Irishman, a Jewish Irishman, yeah. But, you know, it was a wonderful holiday, and I appreciate it even more now that I have lived through the experience of being Parade Grand Marshal. And it really should underscore the importance of the contributions that Irish Americans have made to this country. As you probably are aware, they came over, many of the Irishmen came over in the mid-1840s after a terrible famine in Ireland, the potato famine. And when they came here, they had a couple of things going against them. They were Catholic in a very waspy country at the time, and they weren't very well educated. So they had to take a lot of menial jobs. They took jobs in the, certainly the farming industry. They took jobs in factories, and they took jobs in a lot of municipal organizations, firemen, policemen, other city jobs. And they, like every immigrant group that's come here, they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. And they've made amazing contributions to industry, to science, to anything you can name. Yeah, we have fun on St. Patrick's Day with our, you know, green beer and funny green hats, parades. But the seriousness behind it is to recognize how important St. Patrick was to Ireland, but also how important Ireland and its descendants have been to making America a greater country. And then on March 22nd, and I don't know how widely this is known, but I know we have a lot of viewers who are from Puerto Rico, the Boricua, right? And that's Liberation Day in Puerto Rico. That was the day where the descendants of African slaves were liberated. It happened in the 1840s, and it's celebrated pretty widely in Puerto Rico, but I'm sure here, but it's not very well publicized. But it should be recognized that there was considerable amount of slavery going on in Puerto Rico because it was a big site for harvesting sugarcane and other farm products that were useful to the mainland. So I'm glad that there is a day of reflection about that. Because it's an important milestone that the liberation happened on that day. And the last big date that I will mention, and I think I even talked about this last year when we talked a little bit about Doctor's Day. Doctor's Day is March 30th. It was declared so by George Herbert Walker Bush in 1980. In honor of the contributions that physicians make to the wellness of our country. I always felt a little silly about Doctor's Day because for me, taking care of a patient, making them better, whether you do it by administering a pill, changing a diet, just listening to a problem, or operating on them like I did for an emergency or a trauma, that's Doctor's Day. The wellness that the doctor receives from helping the patients is all the reward that we need. Nevertheless, you will be hearing about Doctor's Day's events, and it's a really wonderful gesture on the part of President Bush to recognize the importance of being a physician. And now, facing the next 2 decades of medicine, we have some critical shortages in very important specialties. And we also are finding that with pandemics coming down the pike, it puts enormous strain on the hospital system. And you probably read every day in the Telegram and Gazette how the emergency rooms are packed. There are patients that are really not in rooms, they're just in hallways. We have to find spaces like recreational spaces in the hospital or lounges that normally would be just for the patients' families to sit around while they're, visiting their loved ones, and turn them into clinical spaces. And part of that is because after the pandemic, there was what was called the Great Resignation. And the resignation involved doctors retiring early because they said, I can't go through any more of this. Nurses switching from nursing to administrative roles or just getting early retirement. A lot of the rehabilitation centers, a lot of the nursing homes lost the ability to take care of all of the people in the beds that they had. So they've cut back on the amount of beds, which makes it harder to move patients through the system. Patients get admitted through the emergency room. They get stuck there because there's no beds. There are no beds because there are no beds in the nursing homes and in the skilled rehab facilities because of the nursing shortage. So that's one thing I think that I've learned from being at UMass Chan Medical School. The days of the doctor being, the top of the heap are kind of gone. And we're imbuing in our medical students, as part of their study, that we have to look at care of the patient in a team fashion. And I'm all into teams. I love baseball. I was an oarsman, so I know how important everybody pulling the oars together was. I think this is a great message to give these young students because they work in the first 2 years together with graduate nursing students. And that comes from a visionary approach, both on the medical school side, but also on the graduate school of nursing side. And I've supervised over several courses with both graduate nursing students and medical students. And it's a wonderful thing to watch them acknowledge the different skill sets they have, the different levels of depth of procedural information and things like that. And you couldn't find a better example of how they all work together so well as the pandemic. Because when I heard that we were going to go into mass production of vaccine to try to fight off this COVID scourge, I immediately called up my dear friend at the Graduate School of Nursing, Dr. Jill Terrian, who just won the Distinguished Service Award from the Chancellor for this effort. And she mobilized a group of graduate nursing students who would teach our first and second year medical students how to give injections. You don't generally pick that up until your third or fourth year, or maybe not even until you're a resident. But we wanted to get an army of vaccinators so that once we got the vaccine, we could put needles in arms in a mass way. And sure enough, we trained about 800 vaccinators through that Vaccine Corps training program. And when we were able to, January 11th, 2021, we first started right there in the Senior Center. Thank you, Senior Center. We used that as our mass vaccination site for about a month or even longer. And then we switched over to Worcester State's wonderful Wellness Center, which was a huge gymnasium that could even accommodate more people. And we never had a shortage of vaccinators, never had a shortage of vaccine. So nurses and medical doctors working together, I think that's a good formula for our wellness and health moving forward. So before I leave, I just want to say a few things about climate change. Now, I'm a pediatric surgeon. What I really know the best is the health and wellness of kids. I know what's a surgical illness that needs to go to the operating room. I know how to take care of them if they're critically injured or ill. I have those boards for critical care certification as well as for surgery. But I think that this climate change challenge is going to be the ultimate crisis that we're going to be facing. And so for the last Board of Health meeting, which happened on February 5th, I invited a dear friend of mine, Dr. Judy Schechter, to come and give us an instructional lecture at the Board of Health meeting in climate change and the medical impact of climate change. And as usual, Dr. Schechter, who is the past board president for the American Board of Pediatrics and also is a past chairman of the Department of Pediatrics for the Miller School of Medicine down in Miami, brilliantly showed how cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, blood clotting disease, insect-borne disease, problems with drought, problems with floods, problems with sun intensity, dermatologic cancers, other cancers, all will be increasing as we continue, unfortunately, this road to losing the ozone layer, to having too much fossil fuel being burned, and it could be a very dire topic if you didn't hear the second part of her talk, which showed about a lot of the mitigations, a lot of the things that we can do. And to my delight, at that meeting, a citizens committee that is working with the recently created Office of Sustainability in Worcester's city government came to also exchange information about what was already being done by that Office of Sustainability. And I had also met with its leader, Mr. Odell, who explained to me that there are heat zones in the city that have been mapped out. There are plans to plant many, many more trees. There are things to optimize our water supply. I think this has been a very forward-thinking group. Also, the possibility of being able to switch over to electric vehicles for Worcester Rapid Transit and to try to convert some of our city buildings into a more geothermal friendly mode of heating and cooling. But this has tremendous impact. It will more likely impact your children and your grandchildren than you, because it's a very long view of where we're going. But if we don't start putting some of these mitigations into place, I think, by 2050 we're going to be seeing incredible deterioration of the happy lives that we have. There are going to be beaches that are gone because they're basically the water will have risen over them. There will be cities that will be flooding regularly, if not intolerably. And there'll be forest fires like we've been seeing, up in Canada, where we had to endure about a 2-week period this past summer of smoky conditions. Your eyes were itching and the color of the sky was weird. That's only going to continue if we don't do the right thing. And amazingly enough, Dr. Schechter said, out of a Congress that consists of about 500 members, about 1/3 don't believe in climate change. And that's shocking. And it's ignorant. And it's something that if you're in denial about, it's because you're being selfish, because it probably will not affect you in your lifetime. But we're already starting to see some of the effects already now. I mean, you know, we don't have the same weather pattern that we used to have. We don't have big, giant nor'easters. We don't have, you know, pleasant, breezy summers. It just seems like everything blurs into the next season, and it doesn't seem to be that division anymore like there used to be. So I'm not claiming that I know what the right thing is, but I think that what Dr. Schechter did was open up the Department of Health size and the Board of Health size to trying to break down some of the silos, because we didn't know really what the Office of Sustainability was doing. They didn't know that we had an interest in this, and we're going to try to bust that all up and make sure we're all, like I said, I was an oarsman, pull the oars together, because otherwise we might be pulling in different directions. So I think March has a lot of promise to it. We've got to acknowledge the fact that a new season is coming. Spring is always one that, you know, hope springs eternal, as they say. And I just wish all of you a wonderful end of the winter. I hope that the beginning of March is not too nasty in terms of roaring like a lion. But whatever happens, I know that one of the best things in my career here is being able to share with you every month a little fireside chat about where we are with some of our biggest public health challenges, and this was no exception. So happy March, and I'll see you again next month.